Writing isn't about making money, getting famous, getting dates, getting laid, or making friends. In the end, it's about enriching the lives of those who will read your work, and enriching your own life as well. It's about getting up, getting well, and getting over. Getting happy, okay? Getting happy. Some of this book, perhaps too much, has been about how I learned to do it. Much of it has been about how you can do it better. The rest of it, and perhaps the best of it, is a permission slip. You can, you should, and if you're brave enough to start, you will. Hello everybody, this is Allan with DeathGroundReviews, and today I am very excited to give this book review. This particular book is probably my favorite book on the subject of writing. It was the very first book that I ever took seriously on the subject. The author everybody knows of. You may love him, hate him, I don't know. I love most of his works. He's most famous as a horror author, although I believe much of his works are science fiction or thrillers, but the author, of course, is Stephen King, and the book is On Writing, a Memoir of the Craft. So to get us started, I just want to give a brief background about the inspiration behind the book. In early 1992, Stephen King was playing in a rock and roll band made up of fellow writer friends. The band's name was the Rock Bottom Remainders. And they had just played a gig in Miami Beach, and they were having Chinese food for dinner at the end of the day. And one of the topics that was brought up was, what's a question that you never get asked by fans during the Q&A at the end of a writer's talk? And his author friend Amy Tan said that no one ever asks her about the language. And Stephen King, in the preface of his book, said that, quote, I owe an immense debt of gratitude to her for saying that. I had been playing with the idea of writing a little book about writing for a year or more at that time, but had held back because I didn't trust my own motivations. Why did I want to write about writing? What made me think that I had anything worth saying? The easy answer is that someone who has sold as many books of fiction as I have must have something worthwhile to say about writing it. But the easy answer isn't always the truth. End quote. Hey, someone who can take a subject matter like horror and make it accessible to millions of people certainly has something to say about the art of writing fiction. This book was also written during a very tumultuous time in Mr. King's life. In 1999, he was struck by a van. The accident nearly killed him. But him having written about that incident and the recovery process required added a whole new level to this book. The book then became not only on writing, but also on living. And the writing process became a means of a way back to life for Mr. King. So the book starts out with what King describes as sort of a curriculum vitae. It's a patchwork of memories from his early childhood through his teenage years, college years, and adulthood. It's basically all those significant experiences that formed him into the writer that he's become today. In this section, you read about his early teenage years when he would hitchhike to the movie theater to watch those Edgar Allan Poe movies, and how horror fiction was sort of a way of coping with the poverty he was living in at the time. And you read about the incident of when his wife, Tabitha, dug the manuscript for Carrie out of the garbage can and encouraged him to keep writing it. He thought he had a dud story, but it turned out to be the novel that made his whole career. And you read about his difficulties with alcoholism and cocaine addiction, and you read about his recovery from the problem. So yeah, that's a lot of what that first section of the book's about, is a memoir of his life and those experiences that made him into the man he is today and the type of writer he is today. So in this middle section of the book, this is where he begins his discussion on the craft of writing. And he starts it out with this playful, imaginative definition of what writing is. He says it's a form of telepathy. You know, he's writing this section of the book in the year 1997, and you might be a few years down the road, but it's sort of this meeting of the minds, so to speak. And it's just this fun, magical way he defines it to get us started. And Then he progresses on to define those toolbox concerns of writing. He discusses vocabulary, he discusses grammar, character development, description. He discusses how to handle symbolism and theme, and how do you incorporate those elements to enrich your story, to enrich the reading experience. One of my favorite discussions in this section is Stephen King's approach to writing a story. So Stephen King is the so-called pantser, the discovery writer. He does not like to pre-outline everything. So the metaphor he uses is writing a story for him is sort of like excavating a fossil. So he'll get an idea, he'll see a character in a particular situation, and that is locating the fossil, right? And then as he narrates and sees how this character reacts to the situation they're in and where they go, that's the process of excavating the fossil. And sometimes he excavates a Tyrannosaurus Rex, like The Stand or It. And then sometimes he excavates a tiny seashell, like one of the many hundreds of short stories that he's published. But I really get a kick out of that metaphor. So then he goes on to discuss the business aspects of writing. He talks about agents and editors. He talks about how you want to present yourself in a query letter to an agent. He talks about writer's market, a source where you can find agents and magazines and things like that. He also talks about what you should look for in an agent. He gives a little spiel on research and how you should do it, and how you should make sure that when you're doing a research for a work of fiction that it doesn't overshadow your story. You know what I mean? You're not writing a dissertation. You're just using it to give some nice details to the background of the story, like adding a spice to a spaghetti, so to speak. So, and these details are what conclude that middle section of the book, and a lot of great advice in that section. In the final section of the book, it's King using all those great craft techniques to tell you the story about his near-fatal accident of being struck by the van. And the main thing I want to emphasize about this part is King sure recognizes the key role his wife has played in his life. We know that if she had not dug the manuscript for Carrie out of the garbage, he may not have ever had a career. He may have thrown the towel in. She was a key part in encouraging him to get off the drugs and alcohol. And after the near-fatal accident, she pushed him to get back into writing. And the writing became sort of a way back to living for him. But yeah, that's the section that concludes the book. Alright guys, so now it is time for the final verdict. Do I recommend this book? You bet I recommend it. And one of the reasons why is going to seem kind of funny because it doesn't really fall in line with everything I was summarizing earlier on. But so I read this book, guys, probably multiple times a year. I don't always read it from cover to cover, but I will reference things in the craft section multiple times a year. And this part of the reason is just this book is so easily accessible. It is such a readable book. I don't think Stephen King often gets credit for how well he handles the language. The whole book's very elegantly paced and well written. There's nothing flowery or diarrhea of the word processor about it. His narrative voice is very addicting. That's what I'm trying to say. So yeah, that's one of the reasons I highly recommend this book. The other reason is quite obvious. This guy has 60 plus best-selling novels on the market. He took a genre like the horror novel and made it accessible to a mainstream audience. When a guy has this kind of success and credentials, he obviously understands very well the craft of writing, and if he's willing to give you advice and you're an aspiring writer, it'd be wise to take the advice. So there is one element of the book that I've come to disagree with after many times of reading it. And this has to do with Stephen King's approach to writing, his pantsing, his discovery writing approach. So the way he defines it in the book, he comes across, at least in my opinion, he comes across as if he's saying that's the only right way to approach writing a story. He defines plotting and outlining as sort of this anti-creative, mechanical, stiff approach to writing a story. He says that, your book's going to come out in the end as mechanical and stiff if you outline it. And I actually disagree with that opinion. I've tried both methods. I've tried pantsing and I've tried outlining. And I've actually had very spontaneous and exciting and creative moments while outlining a story. And I actually think that even Stephen King, even if he doesn't sit down and traditionally outline a story on paper, I still think that as he's going on his daily walk or doing whatever he does throughout the day, that he's outlining the story in his head. So I still think outlining is taking place, even if he's not doing it in the literal way on paper. But this does not hurt his book at all. I still enjoy the book greatly. I still think his advice is terrific. I've just come to realize I disagree with his opinion on that, and after reading it for so many times over the years. But I just wanted to share that for fun. So, all right, guys, that concludes my review of On Writing, a Memoir of the Craft by Stephen King. Please like and subscribe. Please comment below. Give me your opinion about the book. Do you think it's excellent advice for aspiring writers, or do you hate Stephen King and think it's terrible advice? I'm happy to see your opinions and to also discuss with you. So help me keep this monster's heart beating. I'll see you later.